Go. Hi, friends. It's Deanna Wilson with Our Blooming Catholic Life. Habemos Papam. We have Papa Leo XIV. What does it all mean? It's so very exciting. And yet there are very clearly some themes emerging. Even in the conclave, like before they went in and got locked up, the words being bandied about quite a lot included the word unity. They kept saying unity, unity, unity. And so again, when Pope Leo XIV came out, he did talk about unity as well. That really jumped out at me, him saying that word. And I'll be honest, this is our first Augustinian Pope. I don't know a lot about the Augustinians. I did find out they're one of the 4 mendicant orders, of which Franciscans are one, so you'd think I'd know more. What I know is I have often gone to a retreat house in Pennsylvania, up in Malvern Retreat House, and across the street from the property, the Malvern Retreat House property, is immense. There's another immense property, and it is a school for boys. It's run by the Augustinians. So when we had retreats of large numbers at Malvern, the retired Augustinian priests would often come over and offer confession. Now, I'll say the lines were always insane. These priests had such a love of spiritual direction. They could not help themselves in the confessional. And honestly, the women on these retreats, so many of them loved it. They went there to get this spiritual direction. So it wasn't just confession, and it wasn't just the listening model of spiritual direction. They heard your confession. They talked to you. You're told to avoid that in the confessional because you don't want to give like graphic details if it's a sexual sin, but not this. When you say like, oh, I lied, I did this, I did that, just naming off your sins. They'd say, okay, in what kind of situation? Are you saying like you lied to a child to get them to go to sleep? Are you saying you lied to someone with dementia? Are you saying you lied to your spouse? Like, can you go on? I want to give you some direction and an appropriate penance, and maybe some practices to help you move forward into the opposite virtues from the sin, right? So I need to know just a little bit more of the context you're saying. And so they may sit and have some small conversations with you, and then they would give like a little lesson and then say, okay, so hearing that, like, what's your plan moving forward so that this sin, this fault, whatever, how can we grow in the opposite virtue? How are we going to do that? What does that look like for you? I don't want you to leave here without having some sort of a plan. And it was such a loving experience. Again, it was always the Augustinian fathers who did this. Again, the lines were out the door. We were just handing out the pamphlets. The handouts on examination of conscience would run out. So when you came out of confession, you'd hand it to the next person in line who didn't have that handout. So that has been my beautiful experience with Augustinians. I can't say all Augustinians are the same. So I did a tiny bit of research. I basically went to the Augustinian website, but I went to a couple more. It says here, we are followers of Jesus Christ. That was the first thing on their website, so I kind of liked that. It says the Order of St. Augustine, or Augustinian Order, fundamentally based on the teachings of Jesus Christ and later of Aurelius Augustine, the Bishop of Hippo, 354 to 430 AD, was founded to live and promote the spirit of community as led by the first Christian communities, Acts of the Apostles 4:32 to 35. That spirit of community, right? You kind of already heard some of that language from Pope Leo. He says the Order of St. Augustine was born juridically on March 1244 when Pope Innocent IV united various groups of hermits in service to the universal church as a community of mendicant friars. The order from its very beginning has recognized St. Augustine of Hippo as its father, teacher, and spiritual guide, not only because it received the rule in the name of the order from him, but also because it has received from him its doctrine and spirituality. The Augustinian order, to speak of its character, its history, its mission, its charism. First and foremost, however, the Augustinian order is people, men and women who, in the words of the rule we profess, live together in harmony, being of one mind and one heart on the way to God. We are Christians who, captivated by the example of St. Augustine, journey together as we build community and serve the Lord's people. So you hear those themes again and again: community, together, oneness. It makes sense, partly why he may have loved the idea of a synodal church. I don't know that he means it in the exact same sense of St. Francis, but you can hear that listening, that community, that one with, the At-One-Ment, right? If you didn't get that tiny reference there, At-One-Ment, atonement. I'm speaking there of the original charism of the Franciscan friars of the atonement in upstate New York. If you read about Father Paul, you'll know what I'm saying there. So I did a tiny bit of research. Some of the earliest official orders were the Benedictines, and they were in 529, and their reform movements were the Cluny and the Cistercians. Then we had the Carthusians, who did silence and contemplation. So the Benedictines were work and pray, or et labora. They had to work and pray, manual labor and prayer. Okay, then the Carthusians were silence and contemplation, and they had cells that they lived in, right? Instead of living more in community. Then there was a group, I've never heard this pronounced, the Premonstratensians, I don't know, in 1120. And then we had the Trinitarians in 1198. And then came the Mendicant order. So some of these other orders had either been infiltrated a little bit along the way. There were people who would go in, and there were actually, like, this is what St. Clare of Assisi was like. Some of these orders, you'd go in, and some of the nuns would have servants living. Like, there was weirdness. And in this time, the Pope, in trying to reform all the nuns, wanted them all to live under the Benedictine rule. We know that if you read the readings about St. Clare, that was not, over here, St. Clare, that was not happening for her. She's like, no, I want the rule of poverty. So the rise of the Mendicant order was a part of a larger penitential movement. So we had the Franciscans in 1209, the Dominicans in 1216, the Carmelites officially in this form in 1229, and the Augustinians in 1244. So the Augustinians were the last of these four 13th century mendicant orders. And what does mendicant mean? These lived a life of poverty and traveling, and they were in urban areas mainly. So that's where their missionary zeal comes from, right? They were very missionary, but also very poor. So they might have done manual labor, but just to earn their work, to earn their room and board for the day, not necessarily in the way the Benedictines did, where they owned a property and then did manual labor on that property. So there is a bit of a difference there. And so we may see some of that, speaking of poverty and humility, in Pope Leo XIV. Now, things I found out, again, I looked up, they had a link for it there, the Rule of St. Augustine, and this was translated in 1976 by Robert Russell, OSA, Brothers of the Order of Hermits of St. Augustine. And so he was the translator. It says that this rule, the St. Augustinian rule, his rule, was written for nuns in North Africa, and you can find this in his writings in the letter 211. Benedictine's rule didn't come around until around 480 to 434, so somewhere in there. And Charlemagne is the one who kind of adopted Benedict's rule somewhere in the area of 742 to 814. And so then it became, and again, like I said, in mendicant times, that they tried to impose that on all the nuns for a while. And again, this rule is going to talk about oneness and humility. Listen for themes that you will have already heard. Go back and listen to the welcome of Pope Leo XIV and listen to his first homily, and you're going to hear a lot about oneness and humility. Those are the things that jumped out at me, but we'll have a little bit of a commentary here. I'm going to link this rule in the description, and if you can't find that, let me know, and I'll put it in the comments below. I can pin that as well. That's no problem. So the Rule of St. Augustine, Chapter 1. Before all else, dear brothers, love God and then your neighbor, because these are the chief commandments given to us. I already heard that. 2. The following are precepts we order you living in the monastery to observe. I don't know why that's number 2 that seems odd. 3, the main purpose for you having come together. Remember, these were originally spread around hermits, so they were being brought together. Is to live harmoniously in your house, intent upon God in oneness of mind and heart. So if they'd been separate hermits, that would be a challenge. If you've ever lived alone by yourself for a long time, suddenly living together with other people, it is a challenge. And so the rule of St. Augustine, he's kind of kindly wrapping this all up as the nuns were coming to live together. So again, the main purpose for having come together is to live harmoniously in your house, intent upon God in oneness of mind and heart. 4, call nothing your own, but let everything be yours in common. What does that mean? Food and clothing shall be distributed to each of you by your superior, not equally to all, for all do not enjoy equal health, but rather according to each one's needs. For so you read in the Acts of the Apostles that they held all things in common, and distribution was made to each one according to each one's needs. 4:32 and 35. Number 5, those who own something in the world should be careful in wanting to share it in common once they have entered the monastery. 6, but they who owned nothing should not look for those things in the monastery that they were unable to have in the world. Nevertheless, they are to be given all that their health requires, even if during their time in the world, poverty made it impossible for them to find the very necessities of life. And those should not consider themselves fortunate because they have found the kind of food and clothing which they were unable to find in the world. And here we see it's addressing 2 issues. The rich who are coming into the order and the poor who are coming into the order. And I think this is really interesting in here. It's another thing I'm looking for in this. And that is a problem right now in the Catholic Church. You have your wealthier nations and your poorer nations. So I'm looking to this as an example of that. I think this is treated beautifully, not in a socialist way. I think there are a lot of great caveats in here for us to learn from, and I think this will probably be influencing his thought. And so you're going to want to study this rule to understand this Pope when he's saying it, what exactly he means, because we don't always go the furthest direction in our thought. He's making references, friends, that we're already missing, and we're only one day in. It's kind of crazy. Okay, in the rule number 7, and let them not hold their heads high because they associate with people whom they dare not approach in the world, but let them rather lift up their hearts and not seek after what is vain and earthly. Otherwise, monasteries will come to serve a useful purpose for the rich and not the poor. If the rich are made humble there, and the poor are puffed up with pride. Right? That was a hard hit of a bit. So number 8, the rich, for their part, who seemed important in the world, must not look down upon their brothers who have come into this holy brotherhood from a condition of poverty. They should seek to glory in the fellowship of poor brothers rather than in the reputation of their rich relatives. They should neither be elated if they have contributed a part of their wealth to the common life, nor take more pride in sharing their riches with the monastery than if they were to enjoy them in the world. Indeed, every other kind of sin has to do with the commission of evil deeds, whereas pride lurks even in good works in order to destroy them. And I'm going to say that one just again here. Pride lurks even in good works in order to destroy them. And what is good is to scatter one's wealth abroad by giving to the poor, even to become poor oneself, when the unhappy soul is thereby more given to pride in despising riches than it had been in possessing them. Ouch. Ouch. And we know a lot of people have been making this commentary on somebody out there in the world. 9, let all of you then live together in oneness of mind and heart, mutually honoring God in yourselves, whose temples you have become. And that temples you have become, even though he is to come much later, reminds me of Saint Stan, of the Marian Fathers of the Immaculate Conception, talking about being temples of the Lord. He really explores that topic, and I'm really hoping to get to that. I had to set that aside last year. I'm hoping to come back to that, and this could be a momentous time for us to examine that. But let's look at number 9 again. It says, let all of you then live together in oneness of mind and heart, mutually honoring God in yourselves, whose temples you have become. Chapter 2, I've been saying chapter, these must be article numbers. So in chapter 2, we have number 10, be assiduous in prayer, Colossians 4:2, at the hours and times appointed. 11, in the oratory, which is a place where you're gathered together in a monastery for Mass. So in the oratory, no one should do anything other than that which was intended and from which it also takes its name. Consequently, if there are some who might wish to pray there during their free time, even outside the hours appointed, they should not be hindered by those who think something else must be done there. 12, when you pray to God in psalms and hymns, think over in your hearts the words that come from your lips. 13 is then chant only what is prescribed for chant. Moreover, let nothing be chanted unless it is so prescribed. So 12 and 13 are a challenge to us. Again, chanting is amazing and lovely, but it is another occasion for pride at times. And for some, it is a hindrance to number 12. When you pray to God in psalms and hymns, think over in your hearts that words that come from your lips. Often, psalms and hymns are the ones that are chanted or sung. So don't get so caught. What I'm hearing, just me, what I'm hearing is don't get so caught up in the emotions of singing that you're not really thinking in your heart the words that are coming from your lips. And we know this is a criticism that a lot of us have of others out there. Christian denominations that get people worked up into a lather and quite a frother with all that praise and worship music, where they are so high on singing that they're not really listening to the words, or they are so wrapped up in the words that have bad theology. Because often in the world, and it crept into the Catholic Church in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, where the words of the songs were very emotional. Musicians wrote them. Musicians wrote them to evoke emotion. Musicians were writing the hymns. And over here we had theologians. Whereas we have things like Tantum Ergo, St. Thomas Aquinas, musician, theologian. It came fully together for that, right? You need them fully integrated. And it is lovely to sing and chant. But we must be, and notice it doesn't say feeling with your hearts. It says think over in your hearts the words that come from your lips. So many of us have the head and the heart are so disjointed. And he's telling us here, no, put them together. Beautiful. Chapter 3. What is chapter 3? Chapter 3 has a lot in the way of food, clothes. It's like the basics of life stuff. So chapter 3 in number 14 here we have subdue the flesh so far as your health permits by fasting and abstinence from food and drink. However, when someone is unable to fast, he should still take no food outside mealtimes unless he is ill. 15. When you come to the table, listen until you leave to what is the custom to read without disturbance or strife. Let not your mouths alone take nourishment, but let your hearts too hunger for the words of God. And this is a tradition that in many orders has fallen away, where someone would read you lessons or whatever. The Shrine of St. Anthony in Ellicott City, in their papal dining room, you can see there's this little cubby out there, a little balcony where somebody used to edify them during their meals, which is horrific sounding because the acoustics in that room are completely awful. I don't know how much they could hear, but maybe if only that one person was speaking and speaking from up there, you could hear. But it's really interesting when you're trying to have conversations down that level. It's awful. But perhaps the person who was speaking up there could be clearly heard. So perhaps that room was designed perfectly. We'll read later on that they were supposed to have the rule read to them at least once a week. And so this could be a time at meal times. This may have been something, one of those things that were read Why? So that not your mouths alone take nourishment, but let your hearts too hunger for the words of God. 16. If those in more delicate health from their former way of life are treated differently in the matter of food, this should not be a source of annoyance to others or appear unjust in the eyes of those who owe their stronger health to different habits of life. Nor should the healthier brothers deem them more fortunate for having food which they do not have, but rather consider themselves fortunate for having the good health which the others do not enjoy. So instead of being jealous over those who are given better food, be jealous rather that you have, grateful that you have the good health that you don't need that better food. Interesting. It's a very interesting rule, isn't it? I find this rule so balanced. And 17. And if something in the way of food, clothing, and bedding is given to those coming to the monastery from a more genteel way of life, which is not given to those who are stronger and therefore happier, then these latter ought to consider how far others have come in passing from their life in the world down to this life of ours, though they have been unable to reach the level of frugality common to the stronger brothers. Beautiful. Nor should all want to receive what they see given in larger measure to the few, not as a token of honor, but as a help to support them in their weakness. This would give rise to a deplorable disorder, that in the monastery, where the rich are coming to bear as much hardship as they can, the poor are turning to a more genteel way of life. And you can see that's true. They're trying to have everything in common and share things equally. But for the rich, they're going down. They're doing it in all humility. But it can be a temptation for the poor to enter the monastery in the religious life in order to gain something, right? To have a better standard of life. And so we need to keep those impulses and really examine them. Why are we doing this? How is it helping in our life? And that's an important part of spiritual direction. It's not just what you're doing, but why you're doing it. 18. And just as the sick must take less food to avoid discomfort, so too after their illness they are to receive the kind of treatment that will quickly restore their strength, even though they come from a life of extreme poverty. Their more recent illness has, as it were, afforded them what accrued to the rich as part of their former way of life. But when they have recovered their former strength, they should go back to their happier way of life, which, because their needs are fewer, is all the more keeping with God's servants. Once in good health, they must not become slaves to the enjoyment of food, which was necessary to sustain them in their illness. For it is better to suffer a little want than to have too much. So when you're sick, and when you're just after you're sick, you're probably going to be spoiled a little. But then once you're healthy, stop and check yourself and make sure, right? Because once in good health, they must not become slaves to that enjoyment of food which was necessary to sustain them in their illness. It is better to suffer a little want than to have it too much. Chapter 4. I feel like a lot of this is going to deal with purity and chastity. And this I don't know has come up in the talks of Pope Leo yet, but I have heard it in some previous statements that the Cardinal has made. 19. There should be nothing about your clothing to attract attention. Besides, you should not seek to please by your apparel, but by a good life. So the papal attire could be a challenge for him. Now, we did see when he stepped out, he was wearing the more traditional apparel, but I think somebody said he was still refusing the red shoes. So we're going to have to wait and see how this plays out. It's hard to judge a pope by his previous life. We have to see how he's living it now. 20. Whenever you go out, walk together, and when you reach your destination, stay together. So is he going to gather some Augustinians near him? That will be very interesting to see, because this rule really has them together as a community. So I'm looking to see how that plays out as well. 21. In your walk, deportment, and in all actions, let nothing occur to give offense to anyone who sees you, but only what becomes your holy state of life. 22. Although your eyes may chance to rest upon some woman or other, you must not fix your gaze upon any woman. Seeing women when you go out is not forbidden, but it is sinful to desire them or wish them to desire you. For it is not by touch or passionate feeling, there is a typo there. It says, is not by tough or passionate feeling alone. I'm hoping that I don't know. I suspect that's a typo there in number 22. but by one's gaze also that lustful desires mutually arise. And do not say that your hearts are pure if there is immodesty of eye, because the unchaste eye carries the message of an impure heart. And when such hearts disclose their unchaste desires in a mutual gaze, even without saying a word, then it is that chastity suddenly goes out of their life, even though their bodies remain unsullied by unchaste acts. 23. And whoever fixes his gaze upon a woman and likes to have hers fixed upon him must not suppose that others do not see what he is doing. He is very much seen, even by those he thinks do not see him. But suppose all this escapes the notice of a man. What will he do about God, who sees from on high, and from whom nothing is hidden? Or are we to imagine that he does not see because he sees with a patience as great as his wisdom? Let the religious man then have such a fear of God that he will not want to be an occasion of sinful pleasure to a woman. Ever mindful that God sees all things, let him not desire to look at a woman lustfully. For it is on this point that fear of the Lord is recommended, whereby it is written, an abomination to the Lord is he who fixes his gaze. Proverbs 27:20. And I am going to hope this is reflected in Pope Leo XIV's treatment of any sexual scandals, children, teenage boys, young men, seminarians, nuns, whatever we're talking, people's proclivities are, pornography. I am hoping that he takes this section of his rule and takes it seriously. It says even here, an abomination to the Lord is he who fixes his gaze. 24. So when you are together in church and anywhere else where women are present, and I'm going to say vulnerable people are present, exercise a mutual care over purity of life. Thus by mutual vigilance over one another will God, who dwells in you, grant you his protection. 25. If you notice in some one of your brothers this wantonness of eye of which I am speaking, admonish him at once, so that the beginning of evil will not grow more serious, but will be promptly corrected. 26. But if you see him doing the same thing again on some other day, even after your admonition, then whoever has occasion to discover this must report him as he would a wounded man in need of treatment. But let the offense first be pointed out to 2 or 3, so that he can be proven guilty on the testimony of these 2 or 3, and be punished with due severity. And do not charge yourselves with ill will when you bring this offense to light. Indeed, yours in the greater blame if you allow your brothers to be lost through your silence when you were able to bring about their correction by your disclosure. I again hope he takes deep heed of this rule, this section of the rule. What is this? Chapter 4. If you brother, again, type, I think it should be, if your brother, for example, were suffering a bodily wound that he wanted to hide for fear of undergoing treatment, would it not be cruel of you to remain silent and a mercy on your part to make this known? How much greater then is your obligation to make his condition known, lest he continue to suffer a more deadly wound of the soul. 27. But if he fails to correct the fault despite this admonition, he should first be brought to the attention of the superior before the offense is made known to the others, who will have to prove his guilt in the event he denies the charge. Thus corrected in private, his fault can perhaps be kept from others, but should he find or ignorance, the others are to be summoned so that in the presence of all he can be proven guilty, rather than stand accused on the word of one alone. Once proven guilty, he must undergo salutary punishment according to the judgment of the superior or priest having the proper authority. If he refuses to submit to punishment, he shall be expelled from your brotherhood, even if he does not withdraw of his own accord, for this too is not done out of cruelty, but out of a sense of compassion, so that others may not be lost through his bad example. 28. And let everything I have said about not fixing one's gaze be also observed carefully and faithfully with regard to other offenses. Find them out, to ward them off, to make them known, to prove in punishment, all out of love for man and a hatred of sin. 29. But if anyone should go so far in wrongdoing as to receive letters in secret from any woman, or small gifts of any kind, you ought to show mercy and pray for him if he confesses this of his own accord. But if the offense is detected and he is found guilty, he must be severely chastised according to the judgment of the priest or superior. I will take note here. This does not have a way of reporting it, right? This tries to deal with it internally first. And so that's not the part that I'm hoping that he goes with. I'm hoping that he's saying we need to catch things, nip things in the bud before things there's any actions taken before we're looking at images, before any of that. If we see proclivities in people, let's nip it in the bud, get this going, get this person the help they need and the proper, I'm losing the word, the proper correctives or punishments or treatments, whatever, in accordance with the church policies. I'm not saying to go privately if there's been a discretion already. No. Not at all what I'm saying. If you know me at all, you know that's not what I'm saying. I know I was very gung-ho about doing this. I'm thinking more about the reasoning behind it. You're doing it to save their soul, and that we want to nip things in the bud and treat them very seriously. Fear of God here. Sorry, I do love the rule for its seriousness of it, its systemic treatment of it, that it has a plan, and we should have a good plan. I hope that a lot of orders would have these plans. If you see this or suspect it, suspect that there's a proclivity, go to the person right away. Otherwise, follow current church law. I'm not saying not to do that. I'm just liking the seriousness that is treated within in the rule of St. Augustine already here. And again, I will say, like the rule says, this applies to all sins, and I'm going to say, and to all vulnerable people. Moving on to chapter 5. This one is really interesting. This is, again, going back to material belongings, as well as taking care of yourself in general. So this one's really peculiar. Let's see how this is going to play out. Chapter 5, number 30. Keep your clothing in one place, in charge of one or two, or of as many as are needed to care for them and to prevent damage from moths. And just as you have your food from one pantry, so too you are to receive your clothing from a single wardrobe. If possible, do not be concerned about what you are given to wear at the change of seasons, whether each of you gets back what he had put away or something different, providing no one is denied what he needs. If, however, disputes and murmuring arises on this account, because someone complains they received poorer clothing than he had before, and thinks it is beneath him to wear the kind of clothing worn by another, you may judge from this how lacking you are in that holy and inner garment of heart when you quarrel over garments of the body. But if allowance is made for your weakness, and you do receive the same clothing you had put away, you must still keep it in one place under common charge. Again, how does this work out for a pope? We've not had an Augustinian pope, so we've not seen this lived before. 31. In this way, no one shall perform any task for his own benefit, but all your work shall be done for the common good, with greater zeal and more dispatch than if each one of you were to work for yourself alone. For charity, as it is written, is not self-seeking, 1 Corinthians 13:5, meaning that it places the common good before its own, not its own before the common good. So whenever you show greater concern for the common good than for your own, you may know that you are growing in charity. Thus, let the abiding virtue of charity prevail in all things that minister to the fleeting necessities of life. Again, how is this going to play out for a pope? 32. It follows, therefore, that if anyone brings something for their sons or other relatives living in the monastery, whether a garment or anything else they think is needed, this must not be accepted secretly as one's own, but placed at the disposal of the superior, so that, as common property, it can be given to whoever needs it. But if someone secretly keeps something given to him, he shall be judged guilty of theft. 33. Your clothing should be cleaned either by yourselves or by those performing the service, as the superior shall determine, so that, too, great a desire for clean clothing may not be the source of interior stains on the soul. I got nothing there. It goes on because now we have hygiene comments. 34. As for bodily cleanliness, too, a brother must never deny himself the use of the bath when his health requires it. But this, too, should be done on medical advice without complaining, so that even though unwilling, he shall do what has to be done for his health when the superior orders it. However, if the brother wishes it, when it might not be good for him, you must not comply with his desire. For sometimes we think something is beneficial for the pleasure it gives, even though it may prove harmful. Not sure how this plays out, but I have heard some monks say that although it's considered an austere practice, like taking cold showers, taking cold showers is actually quite a delightful thing. So what started out as a sacrifice can then become a temptation. I have no idea if this is talking about this here. This is something from a much older time when baths were not common, so not entirely sure of the logic behind this, but we may hear it again in a couple lines, number 36. So going on to 35. Finally, If the cause of a brother's bodily pain is not apparent, you may take the word of God's servant when he indicates what is giving him pain. But if it remains uncertain whether the remedy he likes is good for him, a doctor should be consulted. 36. When there is need to frequent the public baths or any other place, no fewer than 2 or 3 should go together, and whoever has to go somewhere must not go with those of his own choice, but with those designated by the superior. You can see there was probably a danger right there. Here's a process by which we are not tempted. 37. The care of the sick, whether those in convalescence or those others suffering from some indisposition, even though free of fever, shall be assigned to a brother who can personally obtain from the pantry whatever he sees is necessary for each one. 38. Those in charge of the pantry or of clothing and books should render cheerful service to their brothers. 39. Yikes, 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 yikes. Books are to be quested at a fixed hour each day, and anyone coming outside that hour is not to receive them. Quite a shock for me to have read that. 40. But as for clothing and shoes, those in charge shall not delay the giving of them whenever they are required by those in need of them. Here is their chapter 6. And this is again of living in community. 41. You should either avoid quarrels altogether or else put an end to them as quickly as possible. Otherwise anger may grow into hatred, making a plank out of a splinter and turn the soul into a murderer. For so you read, everyone who hates his brother is a murderer. 1 John 3:15. Number 42. Whoever has injured another by open insult or by abusive or even incriminating language must remember to repair the injury as quickly as possible by an apology, and he who suffered the injury must also forgive without further wrangling. But if they have offended one another, they must forgive one another's trespasses for the sake of the prayers which should be recited with greater sincerity each time you repeat them. That is an interesting one because we know the current pope comes from working, I believe, at the dicastery of bishops and solving quarrels and things there. Again, this is going to be interesting to see how he applies this and carries this out in his life as a pope. And I love how it says you must forgive one another's trespasses for the sake of your prayers, which should be recited with greater sincerity each time you repeat them. Although a brother is often tempted to anger, yet prompt to ask pardon from one he admits to having offended, such a one is better than another who, though less given to anger, finds it too hard to ask for forgiveness. But a brother who is never willing to ask pardon, or does not do so from his heart, has no reason to be in the monastery. Let's read that beginning of that statement again. But a brother who is never willing to ask pardon, or does not do so from his heart, has no reason to be in the monastery, even if he is not expelled. You must then even if he is not expelled. You must then avoid being too harsh in your words, and should they have escaped your lips, let those same lips not be ashamed to heal the wounds they have caused. 43. But whenever the good discipline requires you to speak harshly in correcting your subjects, then, even if you think you have been unduly harsh in your language, you are not required to ask forgiveness, lest, by practicing too great a humility towards those who should be your subjects, the authority to rule is undermined. But you should still ask forgiveness from the Lord of all, who knows what deep affection you love even those you might happen to correct with undue severity. Besides, you are to love another with a spiritual rather than an earthly love. So 43, although it's in chapter 6, kind of feels like it's the bridge to chapter 7. And again, how is this going to live out in the life of the Pope? Saying, even if he's unduly harsh in his language, he is not required to ask forgiveness, because lest by practicing too great a humility towards those who are his subjects, his authority to rule is undermined. So again, we're going to have to look at how this plays out. Chapter 7, number 44. The superior should be obeyed as a father, with the respect due him, so as not to offend God in his person, and even more so the priest who bears responsibility for you all. 45. But it shall pertain chiefly to the superior to see that these aspects are all observed, and if any point has been neglected, to take care that the transgression is not carelessly overlooked, but is punished and corrected. In doing so, he must refer whatever exceeds the limit of his power of his office to the priest who enjoys greater authority among you. 46. The superior, for his part, must not think himself fortunate in his exercise of authority, but in his role as one serving you in love. In your eyes he shall hold the first place among you by the dignity of his office, but in fear before God he shall be as the least among you. He must show himself as an example of good works towards all. Let him admonish the unruly, cheer the faint-hearted, support the weak, and be patient towards all. 1 Thessalonians 5:14. Let him uphold discipline while instilling fear, and though both are necessary, he should strive to be loved by you rather than feared, ever mindful that he must give an account of you to God. 47. And this is for you and I, friends. It is by being more obedient, therefore, that you show mercy, not only towards yourselves, but also to the superior, whose higher rank among you exposes him to all the more greater peril. Chapter 8, number 48. The Lord grant that you may observe all these precepts in a spirit of charity, as the lovers of spiritual beauty, giving forth the good odor of Christ in the holiness of your lives, not as slaves living under a law, but as men living in freedom under grace. 49. And that you may see yourselves in this little book, as in a mirror, have it read to you at least once a week, so as to neglect no point through forgetfulness. When you find that you are doing all that has been written, give thanks to the Lord, the giver of every good. But when one of you finds that he has failed on any point, let him be sorry for the past, be on his guard for the future, praying that he will be forgiven his fault and not be led into temptation. And here ends the rule of St. Augustine. You can see, as we've chatted, there are many implications here, many things that you can see are already at work, in play, in his spirituality, in his life, things he has already said as Pope, and we're only one day in. And so how are these going to look and play out? We have yet to see, but I think I would have to say already it's only one day in. But I do feel this Augustinian flair already, and we're going to see how this is lived as a Pope. Friends, may God bless you and keep you. May he make his face to shine upon you, be gracious unto you, and may the good Lord bless you. In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen.